Hello everyone, Miss Carrie here with my final design team project for the Rabbit Hole Designs. Today I'm going to share some really quick Wonderland embellishments that you can make using your paper scraps and die cuts. These can be made ahead of time and added to a card, scrapbook page, or gift box. If you are a paper crafter, you probably have a pile of scraps lying around that need using. I tend to collect paper scraps and leftover die cuts in a bin, and it's starting to overflow. A great way to use up those items is by making up some embellishment clusters ahead of time so that you have them ready for an upcoming project. I'm going to be using these Wonderland stamp sets from the Rabbit Hole Designs, and I'm going to show you how to create some fun additions for your cards or scrapbook pages. This first embellishment cluster features the Mad Hatter. I've already stamped and shaded the image and grabbed some leftover die cuts and paper scraps from my collection. Now it works best to have the papers selected ahead of time so that you know how to shade the images. This collection has some teal, purple, and black hues, so I used my tri-blend markers to shade the image using those colors. I'm going to bring in a black ink pad and a blender tool and add some ink to the edges of the papers before I assemble them. Using the same ink color on all of the pieces gives it a cohesive look, especially when you're using paper scraps from a variety of collections. Now, that striped paper piece here is a great addition, but the stripes are a little too far apart for the size of this project. So I'm going to bring in a pen and add a few more lines so that it looks more to scale. I'm not worried about these being straight or even. I'm just drawing in the lines in between the printed pattern. Now I'm going to grab some foam tape and assemble all of the pieces. I have a few tags here, the Mad Hatter image, some paper strips, and the tag with a heat embossed sentiment. I find that when you're creating embellishment clusters, it's best to have both vertical and horizontal elements so that your cluster appears balanced. All right, now that the first cluster is assembled, I'm going to bring in one with the March hare. The paper scraps for this cluster have red, blue, yellow, and pink, which is quite the combination, but it's a really whimsical one that's going to make a fun little embellishment. I brought in all those colors to the image when I shaded it, so it looks like a cohesive piece. I want to soften the colors a little bit on the patterns and bring in some brown from the March hare. So I'm going to add a little ink to all of the edges of the pieces I've cut out. Now, if you want a brighter look, you could use a different ink or avoid adding ink to the edges altogether. I am going to trim down a few of these pieces before I assemble them. Again, I am using a mix of thin and thick foam tape to give this dimension. The colors on this embellishment cluster would be great for a spring or summer layout, and they would also make a really fun card. I didn't add any sentiment to this one, but you could easily add a sentiment on a circle or a paper strip using one of the Wonderland sentiments. All right, let's move on to the third cluster. This one has Alice herself, and again, I have a random mix of die cuts, Cricut cuts, and paper scraps. I knew that the image would be primarily blue and yellow, so I made sure to grab items that would match those colors. I especially love those floral patterns and polka dots from the Rabbit Hole Designs collections. I'm not going to add any ink to the edges of these because they all go well together, but if you wanted a more distressed look, you could add ink or even sand the edges of the papers. The plaid paper in the large circle has all of the colors that I've added to this project, so everything matches really well. When you're selecting patterns from your paper scrap bin, try to choose ones with different shapes and patterns with like colors. The plaid has a linear shape, as does the stripes and diamonds. I brought in some florals and polka dots to break up those lines, and I added some elements with scallops to match the curves of the flowers. All right, now that the third embellishment is finished, let me show you two more pieces. This next one has the white rabbit. Now he was a little bit more difficult to shade because he's primarily white, but I did add some soft gray to the image and I used my blender marker to soften the lines. I wanted his coat to match the pattern papers I selected, so I chose a deep yellow color with a blue watch. Now, if you look online, there are a variety of outfits for this rabbit, depending on which book or movie or post you look at. So I just took a little creative license here and made it work for my design. This one is a really simple piece with some horizontal elements and a little flower that I cut in half for the background. Again, I did add a heat embossed sentiment to the front, and this creates a really simple design for a scrapbook page or card. The final cluster has the dodo bird, which I shaded to match my die cuts. I'm going to use some ink around the green plaid pattern to match some of the other colors here, and then I'm going to assemble all of these pieces. I chose to use a bitty blender to add the ink because I didn't want too much ink on those edges. I had some stitched circles left over from a project that I had cut from the Galaxy paper patterns, and I never had a chance to use them. So these made the perfect little element for this piece. I heat embossed the sentiment on vellum, and I've backed it with some soft gray blue cardstock. I used a bitty staple to hold my vellum in place, but you could also use vellum adhesive or a brad or some stitching. All right, I'm going to go off camera and add a few little gems and twine to each of these, and then I'll show you the finished pieces. Today, I shared 5 Wonderland embellishments that you can create using your leftover paper scraps and die cuts. As you can see, I have added some stitching to a few of the elements, some gems, and some twine and ribbon. These little bits of texture just bring those embellishments up another level. Creating elements like these is a great way to use up those items you have stashed away. Having an embellishment ready ahead of time makes for a really quick card design or an embellishment for a scrapbook page or gift tag. These little Wonderland embellishments gave me an opportunity to use up some of the items that I've had stashed away, and they are simple projects that you can make using items you probably already have in your collection. When I go to a crafting day away, projects like this are easy to make. I just need to grab a few stamps, my inks, and the bin of paper scraps, and then I can spend the day creating some embellishments for projects later. I hope that you enjoyed today's project. If you have any questions about the project or the supplies I listed below, feel free to post those in the comments. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.